Good evening, everyone. And welcome to the DCSD Parent University webinar, Youth Vaping, Recognition, Prevention, and Intervention. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stacy Blaylock, and I work in the Communications Department for the Douglas County School District. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, and we're lucky to have our partners from Sky Ridge Medical Center here tonight. Without them, Parent University and webinars like this would not be possible. So thank you. Thank you for your continued support. Our presenter tonight, Dr. Eric Lung, has a background in emergency medicine and is currently the Chief Medical Officer for Sky Ridge Medical Center. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you're welcome to pop them in the Q&A. At the end, we should have some time for live questions with Dr. Lung. So I'm going to hand things off to him, and I hope you enjoy.
And Dr. Lung, you muted.
I see that. We can hear me now, right?
We got it. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Eric Lung. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Sky Ridge. Thank you for the introduction. And today, what I'm going to talk about is vaping, and specifically vaping and the effects that it has on our children. And so I'm going to start a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. Can everybody see that okay?
We got it.
Wonderful. Okay, not too fast. So what is vaping? So vaping is, it's defined as a tobacco or nicotine use by an electronic cigarette that started about 2007, so almost 15 years. Adolescents mostly are using this, and we'll talk a little bit as to why that is the case. These are e-cigarettes, that's electronic cigarettes. Juul, J-U-U-L, was probably or is probably the most popular brand that has been used. And you can see at the bottom of this PowerPoint, you can see kind of how these devices, what they look like. Some of them do look like cigarettes, but they're small pipes. But you can see the Juul in the middle there, what that looks like, and that's probably was the most popular. Why is this a big deal? Because our kids are using it. Up to 2018, you can see 3.5 million youths have tried vaping. That's 20% of high school kids. 1 in 15 middle school kids have tried vaping. Now this is nicotine. It's not tobacco, but it is nicotine, and that's the substance that we're concerned about. And so when you think about vaping, we shouldn't be thinking about, oh, it's safer or it's okay. This is a big deal, and these are substances that our kids are using, and they may not think it's a big deal, but as we're going to talk about, you'll see there are some significant health hazards, and there are some long-term and short-term implications from vaping. So it's a lot of kids, right? We have 5% of the middle school students, 20% of high school students, and it's just a lot. And how would one feel if I have a middle schooler, if my seventh grader started smoking cigarettes? I think that would be appalling, would not make me very happy. And it's the same with these e-cigarettes, with vaping. It should have the same or stir the same emotion as a parent as if our kid were just smoking a regular cigarette. Well, why are they using e-cigarettes? Well, it tends to be trendy, and 39% say that, well, a friend of mine was using them. Some of the other reasons, they're flavorful, and that we'll talk about what exactly goes into these e-cigarettes and the liquid itself, and some of it's a taste, and they vary. They can have different tastes. There's a belief that this is not as harmful as smoking cigarettes, and although sometimes the nicotine can be less, it is nicotine just the same. You can hide it a little bit more. Unlike cigarettes, which would leave a taste or an odor, these e-cigarettes won't have that same detection from a parent. It's cheaper than cigarettes and more readily available. There's no stigma as well that sometimes is associated with smoking. And like a lot of things in our adolescence, that something can be seen as trendy or cool. And I think sometimes vaping can have that kind of have that appearance to our children. So Juul was one of them that I mentioned that had been very popular. And essentially what you have in these e-cigarettes is a liquid. And in the liquid, you have different chemicals and you have the nicotine. And these devices are powered by batteries, and it essentially heats up this liquid to create a vapor. And that is what people inhale, and hence the term vaping. So unlike smoke, which then you can, if everybody has seen somebody that has smoked a cigarette or a cigar, you can see all that smoke that comes out. A vapor kind of dissipates very, very quickly. So it was a very popular company, one of the early companies. And so they had dominated with being at 75% of the market at one point. So as we talked about, why are kids using this? It's easy to hide. It's the smoke, it's less noticeable. The flavors that are attractive, which is different than regular cigarettes. It doesn't irritate the lungs as much as smoking does, although, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, there are acute injuries that do occur from vaping. So what signs would you have? Well, this is typically, these are signs of people that would inhale nicotine. But again, there are some other chemicals, and I'll touch about that shortly as well. Other chemicals that could contribute to the behavior of our kids: irritable, anger, impatience, and a hard time concentrating. And it's been shown or known that on the young developing brain, that vaping can cause problems with long-term concentration and really brain development and brain growth. There's weight gain in these kids that are using these e-cigarettes. You can see sudden use of using cologne and perfume, increased thirst, desire for the flavors, nosebleeds. I think missing phone chargers is more a sign of just being in kind of a fog. And then there is some appearances of the USB drives. These e-cigarettes themselves have components that are similar to the USB drives on our computers. So, and I think some of them actually have, you can charge via your USB port. So these are all kind of signs that maybe our kids may be vaping. The health concerns: nicotine is super important. Nicotine it's a drug. It's what's in tobacco cigarettes, and it's highly addicting. If you were to look up what are the most addicting substances or chemicals in our society, you'll see things like heroin and cocaine, and then you'll see nicotine, and you'll see alcohol. But nicotine is up there on the list as third or fourth most abused chemical in our society. Long-term concerns: chronic bronchitis, and this goes with the irritation to the lungs. Sleep disturbances, cancer risk, just like smoking tobacco cigarettes. There is a cancer risk associated with the use of e-cigarettes. You see under there's an acute scenario as well that's called EVALI, and that is the e-cigarette vaping use associated lung injury. This is an acute process which is not seen that often, but it is a pretty big deal. In fact, there have been some deaths associated with this. And I'll show you a picture later in this presentation. But essentially, you have such irritation to the lungs that they get very inflamed, and then it prevents one from breathing well, if not at all. So these kids end up going to the emergency department, and in the ER, we try to do what we can to help them and keep their lungs, keep them breathing. But there have been deaths associated with this. Most of the problems associated with nicotine, let alone the e-cigarettes, is a long-term issue. And quite frankly, as I said, it's only been around for 13, 15 years. The real long-term problems we're not 100% certain of. However, we do know from plenty of research what the effects of smoking tobacco and nicotine can do. And we do know that e-cigarettes do cause some of the same problems. So there is some feeling that the problems that people who have been long-term tobacco smokers, people or kids that have been long-term vapors, may have a similar path. So nicotine effects, I think most people know that smoking cigarettes of any kind then increases our stroke and our heart attack risk, increase of lung diseases like emphysema or COPD. It can cause DNA damage, which is doctor talk for an increase in cancer. Persistent coughing, this goes to suggest the lung damage, that our lungs are not transmitting, able to pull the oxygen out of the air and transmit it in, and causes coughing. Certainly having alveolar damage or lung damage, tissue damage to our lungs will cause this as well. There's some reports of hearing loss and vision loss, increased risk of miscarriage. Nicotine can cause a buildup of plaque really in our arteries, which can lend itself to hypertension, can lend itself to these miscarriages, to strokes. It's just overall, even though the amount of nicotine in e-cigarettes varies, sometimes it's more than a cigarette. It's having any amount of nicotine is very bad for our health, let alone the young developing brain. How much nicotine is in cigarettes? Well, it's just highly variable. And I think what I would just take away from this slide is that there's just a range of nicotine. And I might hazard a guess to say that most adolescents that are using e-cigarettes are not looking at any nicotine content. They're probably looking at flavors. There was one observation that even some of these products that are labeled as zero nicotine were found to have some nicotine in them. I think what's equally as concerning is not just the nicotine that is found in these e-cigarettes, but there are other chemicals as well that potentially can have long-term consequences. And this is just a chart that shows you the amount of nicotine that's found in a traditional cigarette and the variability that can be found in these vaping pods. So nicotine is highly addictive, and a young brain is going to learn addiction. And certain brains and certain people are going to be more likely to be addicted than others. But certainly starting when one is young with an addicting substance, they're going to have a higher incidence of being addicted to other substances in the future. And that's just what we see with kids that vape, that they go on to smoke cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes, use other drugs, and certainly alcohol would be part of that too. So as I said, nicotine isn't the only substance we're worried about in these pods. This slide shows kind of a schematic of what one might be breathing in. in addition to the nicotine, heavy metals, nickel and tin, cancerous substance, and other organic, volatile organic compounds. As I said, when you're younger, nicotine can actually harm the developing brain and have long-term effects on memory, and really cause irritability, problems with the sleep, learning. The aerosols, as I mentioned, the heavy metals, nickel and tin and lead, and as well as some other organic compounds, ultrafine particles. What's the significance of this is when we breathe in things that we normally wouldn't breathe in, our lungs become irritated and inflamed. And if you constantly inflame your lungs repeatedly, they become scarred and the tissue breaks down. This is not unlike, imagine a football player who every week has strain to his joints, and they get really inflamed, and then he heals, and the next week he's back doing the same thing, inflaming those joints again. And you know what happens to a lot of these football players when they retire is they end up getting joint replacement surgery multiple times over and over. That's the same thing that happens in the lungs. When we breathe in any type of a smoke, any type of a vapor, repeatedly, you inflame the lungs. It makes it hard to breathe. Oftentimes the lungs can heal, but then when you repeatedly do it, scar tissue will form. It's the same with cirrhosis and anybody that drinks a lot of alcohol. The liver gets inflamed and then it gets better. And that constant back and forth causes scar tissue to form, and eventually that organ is not going to work. And that's what happens in the lungs. These are people who are chronically on oxygen because they have damaged their lungs, oftentimes due to smoking when they were younger. Other drugs are also found in these pods. Marijuana is one. That's probably the most common one. And you can see there's a fact there that a third of middle and high school students who had used e-cigarettes had also used ones with marijuana in them. And certainly in a state or fast becoming a country where marijuana is legal, that's it's not very surprising. So other health concerns. So this was the acute injury or acute presentation of somebody that has been vaping. As you guys know, I was an emergency physician for 18 years, and it's fairly unusual for somebody to come in to the ER who had smoked tobacco cigarettes and all of a sudden had a problem with their lungs. And I'm not including people who have asthma or who have emphysema. I'm just saying that somebody that smoked a cigarette that then would come in with an acute problem. But that's not the case with vaping. And so you can see this was something that was only diagnosed or recognized a couple of years ago. And of the 3,000 cases, 68 people had died. Most of them were male and they were younger under the age of 35. Some of them did have an underlying asthma condition. But as you'll see, there's a slide that's going to show a picture of some lungs, an x-ray of some lungs, and it doesn't have the appearance that asthma would. So this is something within these pods, something within these vaping, this chemical is triggering a very significant and acute reaction. Some association with marijuana, when kids are having this reaction, you can see obviously nicotine. There are some different plant oils, petroleum, vitamin E in there as well. It's not quite known which of these necessarily is triggering this reaction. Again, it's the amount of cases, that 3,000 is far less than how many people are actually vaping themselves. And then the deaths is even less. So there's not enough known about this. So this is kind of a schematic. You can see that this substance coming in and spreads throughout the entire lung fields. And the symptoms that people are going to have, that the adolescents are going to have, they're going to be short of breath. They're going to have the cough. Again, just imagine that their lungs are inflamed. They may even be clamping down and they're not functioning properly. So people can't breathe when this is occurring. They may have some fevers. Overall, they're not feeling well. They're nauseated. Their heart rate will be going very fast because their body is trying to react to this lack of oxygen that they're able to pull in. They're going to be breathing faster than normal, more so than a regular comfortable rate. And they'll be hypoxic, which is doctor talk for I'm not getting enough oxygen in my body to function. We can all, when the body works, we're breathing in air, but we're extracting oxygen from that. So when the lungs are inflamed, when that tissue does not work, then we're not able to extract the oxygen from the air and we can't breathe. On an X-ray, you can see sort of this diffuse swelling everywhere in the lungs. There is pneumonia generally refers to an infection in our lungs, and pneumonitis refers to inflammation in our lungs. And I'd say that in addition to having this damage, the pneumonitis is from an acute standpoint is something we see when somebody's having a problem. Is something we see most often. You can have infections with this. When you're breathing in substances, you can be more likely to get some infections as well. So all of these things are bad things. So when should you, as a clinician or as a parent, when should you suspect this? Well, if you have a child or somebody who is essentially feeling fine 1 second and another second all of a sudden can't breathe and is having all of these symptoms, the coughing, they may be looking very uncomfortable, they may be sweating, and this would be in absence of a known fever. Hey, I'm not feeling well, I've got muscle aches. This would be something much more acute. So as parents, what can we do? Well, there was a commercial when I was a kid where I think it was a marijuana commercial, to be honest, and the father goes to his son's room and says, where did you get this? Why are you doing this? And the kid denies, and then in the end, the kid says, I learned it from watching you. And the punchline of that commercial was, parents that use drugs have kids that use drugs. And it really makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Parents that smoke cigarettes in front of their kids will likely have kids that smoke cigarettes. So for the purpose of this talk, stop using tobacco products. Stop using e-cigarettes if you're a parent, because our kids are going to emulate what we do. The same goes for alcohol. Have conversations with our kids, especially if you have a middle schooler or a high schooler. Be open with them and talk to them about the dangers, and talk to them about that it's, that it's not cool to do these things. Talk to them about the what can happen long term and the damage to their lungs, and just reach out to them. It's a part of being a parent. It's part of being a good parent. You talk about the highly addictive nature of e-cigarettes, and I think when we're younger, when we're adolescents, we're in high school, we think we're invincible. But this addiction, and particularly with these e-cigarettes, it's going to start early, because those are the people that are using this are young minds that will potentially be damaged from starting this early drug. In addition, starting the addictive process earlier, and certainly be an advocate and be on the side of recognizing that it is a problem. All right, and I'll end that there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lung. It looks like we do have a couple of questions from the
Okay.
Q&A box. If anyone else has questions they would like to ask, feel free to pop it in right now. So the first question is, can you get a lung transplant?
It's not done too often, but they can do transplant of lungs. It's an enormous operation, and there are far less lungs than people that need them.
Well, thank you. And second question is, can vaping have negative interactions with ADHD and depression type medicine such as Lexapro or Prozac?
So it's a good question. So in order to study that, to answer that question, you essentially would have to have willing participants taking those medications and then subjecting them to these e-cigarettes. And so I can't really answer that to say that, you know what, if you vape and you're on these medications, you're doing twice as much damage as if you did them separately, as if you were just vaping and you weren't taking any medications. It's certainly not making things better. And so I was trying to paint a picture that it's a bad thing, much to the same, in the same sense as if we just had a conversation about smoking cigarettes and the dangers of tobacco. The vaping seems to be more of a younger person's pastime, if you will. It's not a great word for it, but by combining those medications, you're not diminishing the bad effects that one would have with vaping.
Thank you. Evelyn would like to know, what about hookah?
It's similar. Any tobacco product, any nicotine product. If you think about this, and I was trying to use the example of the football player. Anytime we inhale something into our lungs, and something that isn't normal, and that's whether it be smoke or vaping or anything else, it's going to be bad for our lungs, especially if it's a repeated exposure. Somebody that was in a house fire, right? They're going to breathe in some smoke and they cough and they might have some initial acute injuries. Probably, hopefully, depending on really what they were breathing in or what the smoke was coming from, they wouldn't necessarily have any long-term effects. But if you had that repeated over and over in several forms, that inflammation and then that healing back and forth can cause long-term problems. And hookah is the same, that you're breathing in something that's going to irritate your lungs. It's delivering a drug, let's say nicotine or marijuana. You're breathing it in, you're delivering it, but that is going to irritate the lungs. And that is bad long-term.
All right. And Lisa asks, how do you recognize the use of vaping? Smell? How do you differentiate between other odors?
Yeah, it's tough. That's one of the reasons why kids are using this, is that they can hide it. The smoke from somebody that smokes a cigarette, there's a smell that stays on their breath. You can see when a smoker, the smoke actually stays in the area for a short time afterwards. But vaping is different. Vaping dissipates quickly. It's easier to hide from people. As I said, there's not the same stigma as it has that tobacco use has. So it can be very difficult, and so it can be hard. If your kid were using, it could be very difficult to notice. And so that's there was one slide that talked about some things you might want to look at: the irritability, the insomnia. But I think it's very difficult from a taste or from a smell standpoint to see it. And I think we just need to have conversations. we have a sex talk with our kids at some point. We need to have, you have a drug talk with your kid. And we need to do the best we can as parents. And I think having that open conversation is certainly part of it.
All right. And we have a couple of questions asking about age restrictions and how kids are getting these products. So are there the same buying restrictions on e-cigs as regular cigarettes? Are, the age related restrictions enforced?
Yeah, it's a good question. My honest answer is I don't know. I've never gone to purchase these, and I don't have a kid old enough to try and go purchase it. But I would say this, there's a lot of illegal things in our society, and everything can be found. And whether that is somebody selling it outside of a building or somebody who's old enough to buy it for somebody else, I think it's always accessible.
All right, and Christina would like to know, has there been any correlation with vaping and the effects on those that have depression or anxiety?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to that an earlier question on that. I don't know of a direct connection with vaping and it making people more anxious. I do know that nicotine can have a calming effect on people, but then obviously that wears off. I do feel that any sort of a benefit that is viewed from vaping is by far outweighed by the negative effects.
And we also have a couple of questions asking about the resources available, such as the Colorado Quit Line. What other types of help could we get for the teen? So nicotine patches, should contact their doctor?
Yeah, there are other options. These e-cigarettes, the vaping, it's not an FDA approved, will help you quit smoking tobacco cigarettes so you can use this vape. It's not approved for that. Yes, there is nicotine gum and there are nicotine patches, and that's what people do get addicted to. Nicotine is highly addictive. And so there are some other avenues that are available, much like somebody that might be addicted to cigarettes, they could, if they had vaped for several years and they're addicted to the nicotine, they're addicted to vaping, nicotine gum and nicotine patches would help with that. Was there another part to that question? I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure I was complete.
If you recommended the parents contact the teen's doctor.
Oh, yep. Contacting the doctor's office. I think having discussions with our kids is probably even more important. There are, nicotine. There are hotlines, as you mentioned, a hotline, and I think that would apply if you're, anything that really it would help one quit smoking tobacco. I think the same sort of support will help with people that vape. But when we're talking about adolescents, it's a little different. When you're talking about an adult, adults generally don't have parents that are still caring for them and still helping them grow. And so I think parental involvement is still pretty big here.
Are there any other additional questions?
And I should mention that the World Wide Web is very worldwide, and things are available online as well. So there are multiple avenues, I think, for kids to have access to these things.
And if anyone would like to ask a question outside of the Q&A, you're welcome to click that raise a hand button and we can unmute you. And you can ask your question live. I don't think we have any takers. So Dr. Lung, was there anything else you wanted to add? Oh,
No,
we do have a question.
Okay.
Do you have an image of a damaged lung from vaping?
I do not. I didn't have one other than that kind of schematic in the slideshow. But I'm certain, again, that if one were to Google it, they would be able to see it. You could look at a damaged lung from tobacco, and I'm hesitant to say it would look exactly the same as a damaged lung from vaping. And it's because vaping has not been around long enough. We don't have people that are 65, 85 years old that have been vaping for all this time. So there's still some newness to vaping that we don't know exactly what the damaged lungs would look like. But the acute phase that I talked about, that acute scenario where the lungs are all inflamed, everything basically, instead of, it just looks very white and inflamed. So just imagine if there were a condition where your whole body could be inflamed and how uncomfortable that would be and how you wouldn't be able to move your arms and legs. Well, imagine if your lungs were inflamed and all that restriction and discomfort were in your lungs. And imagine you wouldn't be able to breathe, and you would cough, and you would have chest discomfort and back discomfort. And it's not like you can find a position of comfort like when you injure your arm. It's constantly there, and it's very stressful not to be able to breathe.
And let's see, we have a question from Kendall. Kendall, are you there?
Yes. Dr. Lung, thanks for taking the time tonight. I appreciate all the information. That's great stuff. I've got a couple of teenagers, right? And the last thing they want to do is listen to their parents. And, I could talk to them until I'm blue in the face about this stuff, right? How bad it is for them. But until they want to, take the step to treat their addiction, it is going to be extremely difficult for me to turn the page with them, right? So talk to me about, some intervention strategies and addictive behavior and what you have seen work in the past with, the typical teenage mindset of invincibility, as you mentioned before, and their refusal to change their behavior.
Thanks, Kendall. I tell you, it's going to be more of a parenting question, really. I think more so than even a medical question, right? If you have some kids that are mid-teens or somewhere on either end, I think it's a very big challenge. There are a lot of books on parenting, but none of them are really exactly right. I mean, we make this up as we go, and all we want to do is love our kids and try and teach them, the difference between right and wrong, and don't do what I did. If there were any, we've gone through our teenage years, and we know what was right and what was wrong, and we just want our kids to do what's, all the right things. And I think it's very difficult. I think especially when you have a kid or kids that are in that age of pushing away our parents, and it's very tough. So I honestly, I don't have the right answer for you on how we take our kids, and whether it's vaping or whether they're marijuana or drinking alcohol or not doing their homework or not eating their vegetables. It's this ongoing battle. And I think, as a parent, we're going to do the best that we can. And if at the end of the day, or once the kids are older and become adults, if we can say that we did everything that we could, that's going to be probably the best that we can do. But it's very nerve-wracking. It's very scary, and you don't know which way things could potentially go. Our kids are young and innocent for so long, and we think it's going to stay that way. And then, there's a time where they're going to potentially explore things that we don't want them to explore. I think, and I stressed on this a couple times, just having the open dialogue to communicate our concerns with our kids, to have to support them, to have them come talk to us about peer pressure. I think that's really important. And we do have, and you'll forgive me for pulling this up, but from a behavioral health standpoint, at Health One does have
I think we may have lost Dr. Lung. Hang tight, everyone. Oh, I think he's back. Dr. Lung, I believe you're muted.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. So what happened there? That's the computer that died. And that's me quickly pulling up on my phone. So anyway, so I want to just finish up that call from Kendall that there is Health One does have behavioral and wellness resources that are available for adults and kids.
And we've had other doctors from, and even some counselors from Skyridge Medical Center talk about Health One's behavioral resources. So yes, there's quite a lot there. And I can certainly make sure that's included in the email that everyone will get tomorrow with the recording of this webinar too.
That would be great.
Yeah. Are there any more questions, or Dr. Lung, is there anything else you would like to address?
No, I think it's that the caller Kendall, that's a real tough. It's tough to be a parent, and I hope I know he knows this. I know that I know it. I think all parents know that it's very difficult, and there are no necessarily any right answers, and it's very difficult to give somebody advice on how to raise your kid. And I know that's more general sense than what he was asking, but I think we need to communicate the dangers of vaping with our kids. Ideally, we have a conversation before things even start, and don't let them be curious about what things are. They're going to be curious anyway, but to really have the dialogue that they're going to be exposed to it. They're going to be exposed to marijuana and alcohol and vaping. And the earlier that we could have conversations about this, is probably the best chance that we'll have to prevent them from indulging.
And Megan wants to know if there will be a PDF version of this presentation available.
We can have the slides available for you.
Yeah, we can definitely make that happen. And that will also be in the email that will come tomorrow with a recording of this webinar. Okay, anything else? Still. No? Oh, okay. I guess we'll wrap a little early tonight then. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for your time too. We really appreciate you guys coming out here. I know it's a crazy time right now, so thank you for joining us. And like I said, tomorrow everyone will receive a recording of the webinar, a link to the PDF of the presentation, and in the future you can always find this information on the DCSD website at dcsdk12.org/parentuniversity or on the DCSD YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.